My name's Stewart MacGlashen, and today, together with my co-presenter Peter Barr, and on behalf of the soldiers of Killiecrankie group, we're pleased to present the story of Killiecrankie railway station, the site of which is just behind me here. The Soldiers of Killiecrankie produces a series of regular Facebook videos highlighting the different aspects of life in the area throughout the ages. And our cameraman today is our chairman, James Rattery. Peter and myself have got a long association with Killiecrankie. We remember the station during its twilight years in the 1950s and the early 1960s, when the station was closed, along with many other small rural stations on the Highland Line and indeed in most parts of the country. Incidentally, the original name of the village was actually Aldgurnig, and from the beginning the Highland Railway were heavily promoting the historical and scenic aspects of the area. And this, together with Sir Walter Scott's romantic novels, brought tourists flocking to the Highlands. The station opened a couple of years after most of the other stations on the line. Not quite sure why. Perhaps it was an afterthought to cash in on nearby association with the Battle of Killiecrankie and the Pass of Killiecrankie. To underline this association, they named their station not Aldgurnig, as you would expect after the village, but Killiecrankie, after the local battle and the pass. But over the years the village gradually became known as Killiecrankie. This is a unique case of the village being named after the station and not the other way around. And the school, which is just adjacent to the station here, or what was a school, that remained the Aldgurnig School up until the outbreak of World War II.
Right, standing here on the bridge overlooking the railway line that takes trains south to Perth and north to Inverness, it might be difficult to believe that there was a time up until 1965 when this was a busy railway station. The line itself was constructed by a famous Victorian engineer called Joseph Mitchell. Yeah, one of the problems that Joseph Mitchell had in bringing the line through Killiecrankie was getting the line through the pass of Killiecrankie. But he solved that by building a viaduct, a curved viaduct, which we shall learn more about later on in the presentation. And that viaduct took the line through the pass. It then entered into a tunnel. It then went through and past an embankment, and before it emerged into the station down here. Now, back in those days, the railway line was part of the Inverness and Perth Junction railway system, but in 1865 it was converted to the Highland Line when it joined up with a number of other railway systems to create the Highland Line, which was representing 219 miles of track. This track included a number of local stations. We'll just quickly go through a list of those and look at them on the map. This map shows the railway line from Perth to Inverness. This is the south end, moving from Perth up here to the first station we mentioned, which was Dalguise. That was opened in 1863 and closed to both passengers and goods traffic in May 1965, which was about the time that most of the stations closed. From Dalguise we move across to Guy Station here. Guy Railway Station, which was opened in 1863 and closed in August 1965. By 1948 Guy had a very limited service with no Sunday stopping trains, one Monday only service and several that stopped only on request. The next one is Balin Lewigs Station. Now, Balin Lewigs Station served the village of Balin Lewig from 1863 to 1965, and it was an important junction for people wishing to change trains to go on the Aberfeldy line. Then from there you come to Pitlochry, which is now the main station in the local area, and that was opened in 1863. In 1865 it became part of the Highland Railway system. Today it is the major station in the area, with services provided by Abellio ScotRail, LNER and the Caledonian Sleeper. From Pitlochry up going further north to Killiecrankie, that station is now completely removed. We will come back to Killiecrankie in detail later in the presentation, and Killiecrankie we move on now down to Blair Atholl. Now the first train passed through this station on September the 9th 1863 as the line was extended from Pitlochry to Aviemore. At its busiest, according to some reports, there were as many as 50 people working at Blair Atholl station. Today it remains open for passengers, but it is unmanned apart from the fact it has a signal box which is obviously manned, and that's because it's beside a level crossing. One interesting point about Blair Atholl is that the last locomotive to be introduced onto the Highland Railway was a Class 064 tank engine designed to perform banking duties. Well, now banking duties were, the point was about those engines is that they helped to push trains up the line and over the Dromocta Pass. Now originally it was considered that the Dromocta Pass couldn't be passed by trains because it was too steep, so hence the use of the banking engines. But once the trains began to get more power, the banking engines were no longer required. But it's interesting to report the account of a local person, Mr. Stuart MacDonald, who lived in Blair Atholl, and he reported that if the assisting loco was going as far as Aviemore, i.e. the banking engine was going as far as Aviemore, it tended to be attached to the front of the train. He recalled one morning while waiting to take the school train to Pitlochry, the Royal Highlander, which was the main line but up to Inverness, was running very late, and while they were taking water from the double water columns in Blair Atholl, because of course they needed water for the steam engines, the banker was buffered up to the rear end of the train in order to push it north. When the lead loco whistled to go, the banker replied, and they all set off together with a tremendous noise. However, all those on the platform had to take shelter from the sparks and small pieces of coal coming from the banker's chimney. Now it is a very sad fact that steam trains are not really seen very often except on special occasions, and I think that people enjoy the romance of steam, and they wish that there were more steam trains puffing along the lines. Okay, moving on, we come to Strewn Station, and that was opened in September 1863 and closed in May 1965. Now an interesting thing about Strewn Station is that in September 1877 there was an accident on Strewn Station when a goods train travelling from down the Spiddle down towards Struan became detached because of a poor coupling. Now the engine driver didn't realise that, and he moved on down to Struan, stopped the train, and then he was rear-ended by 17 trucks coming in and hitting him in the rear end. Now quite a number of those trucks were badly damaged, and apparently 18 sheep and 6 pigs died in the accident, and the guard, a Mr. Malcolm McFarlane, was badly injured and conveyed to Pitlochry to seek treatment from one Dr. Irvine, and that was in September 1877. And finally, on the Highland Line, we come to Down the Spiddle Station. And Down the Spiddle railway station had 2 platforms. A through station opened in 1863 with a wooden signal story building on the up platform. It was the highest line station on the Highland Line, being 1,400 feet above sea level, and it closed to regular passenger traffic in May 1865. It was the highest station on the railway system. Now, unfortunately, it is no longer with us. The line, of course, still continues to travel through Down the Spiddle, as indeed it does from Perth all the way to Inverness. Here we are at Killiecrankie Viaduct, which was completed in 1863. This dramatic curving viaduct is a 10-span masonry structure with segmental arches, and Joseph Mitchell did a really great job working out how to take the line through the pass of Killiecrankie. This impressive structure was opened on the 9th of September 1863, and it cost £5,720, and of course it remains in use today and is a popular stop for people doing a walk through the pass of Killiecrankie.
This is the viaduct which was built by Mitchell. If we look up here, and halfway up, if you look very closely, you'll see a carved face. It's carved into the stone. Now, nobody knows for sure the origins of this. It is a bit of a mystery. However, there's two theories. One of the more romantic ones, perhaps, is that even in the late part of the 19th century, in this part of the Highlands, there was still a lot of superstition and old beliefs, perhaps dating back to pagan times, and the old Celts believed that every tree and every object had a spirit or a soul of its own. So perhaps one of these Highland people that were working a viaduct felt that it should have a face, and this was the result. The more common story, the one that I heard as a child, and Peter also heard exactly the same story independently. There was two Irish masons working on the viaduct, building it in 1863, and one fell to his death. One brother fell to his death at this very spot, and his brother, as a kind of memorial, because these people were quite illiterate at the time, he carved a face in the stone in the likeness of his brother.
Before we look at the second of Joseph Mitchell's constructions, I'd just like to mention one thing more about the viaduct at Killiecrankie. I know for sure that there are a number of people who like to take the trip between Pitlochry and Blair Atholl, or vice versa, specifically to go over the viaduct. The train slows down, always slows down, to go over the curved construction, and from there you can look down into the valley below the pass of Killiecrankie and possibly relive some of the aspects of the Battle of Killiecrankie. But I definitely know that people do that and enjoy the ride. Well, here we are at the second of Joseph Mitchell's constructions. It's the bridge that was built to carry trains over the River Tilt. It was built between 1861 and 1862, and the line itself was opened in 1863. The cost of the bridge was £6,500. Now, it's what is called a lattice girder construction, with stone abutments, and it measures 250 feet long and 40 feet high. Now, the single span across the river is actually 150 feet long and has a stone portal with mock fortifications at each end. And Joseph Mitchell built these because of their proximity to Blair Castle, and he thought it would complement Blair Castle, though he thought at the time it was somewhat more ornate than was otherwise necessary. Here we are at the third of Joseph Mitchell's constructions, taking the Highland Line north to Inverness. This particular one crosses the River Garry at Struan. In some respect, you could look upon this bridge as unique because it is a bridge over a bridge. Now, the original bridge is the road bridge across the River Garry, which was probably built in about 1765. Now, when the railway line was opened under construction of Joseph Mitchell, the new rail bridge was put over the top, and that's a castellated design. That was a single track bridge, but later on in 1899 a second bridge was put alongside the rail bridge in order to allow for a double track. Here we go with the train going over. Now, the timing for that is really good. That's a Network Rail engineering train going north over the bridge built by Joseph Mitchell. Now, the design is in keeping with other structures along the line, and the line rises to 1,484 feet at Dromocta, which is the highest summit level in Britain between Downespittle and Dalwhinnie. So here we have the third of Joseph Missel constructions. Interesting, a bridge over a bridge to take the line north to Inverness. Okay, we've looked at the stations between Dalguise and Downespittle, and now we're back here on the bridge overlooking with the railway line at Killiecrankie, where we'll have an opportunity to look closely at the history of the station. Killiecrankie Station was established in 1865, that's 2 years after the opening of the Highland Line. Originally it was a single track line through Killiecrankie with a single platform, but the station was later developed to include a passing loop which enabled 2 trains to go alongside one another, one going north, one going south. There was also a siding here with up to 40 wagons a day loaded with lime from the nearby quarry to be distributed throughout the country. New station buildings were erected in 1896, and the station remained virtually unchanged until it closed in 1965, a few months short of its 100th anniversary. The station was kept busy with freight and passengers for most of its working life. Older school children used to take the train from Killiecrankie to Pitlochry on a daily basis until the time it closed. The extracts from the LMS delivery book 1925 to 1928 shows that a wide range of goods were being delivered to local farmers, businesses and the general public. These goods were dispatched from furthest reaches of the kingdom, but also from as close as Blair, Atholl and Pitlochry. Goods delivered included, according to this list, cattle, sheep, cattle food, manure, linoleum, a barrel of treacle, bicycles, a motorbike, crates of whiskey, a solid fuel range, books for the school and a barrel of herrings. Some of these goods then had to be transported many miles up the remoter glens by horse and cart on unmetalled roads. One interesting thing to report about Killiecrankie Station: on Saturday, February the 13th, 1915, the 8:40 AM express train from Inverness to Perth derailed at the south end of Killiecrankie Station. 3 vehicles left the rails close to the River Garry, which runs 50 feet below the embankment. A 4th vehicle left the rails in the middle of the tunnel 200 yards further on, but remained upright. The accident was attributed to the fact that one wagon left the rails passing Blair Atholl, thus fouling the points at Killiecrankie, and the forward part of the train continued to Perth, but the line was blocked for 12 hours.
We're now standing in front of what used to be Killiecrankie Primary School. I went to this school a good few years ago now, and after we left primary school we go to secondary school in Pitlochry, and we get the train from Killiecrankie Station every morning. So didn't learn much at school because they used to sit in the classroom there, had high windows, but you could look out onto that magnificent backdrop there. That's Craig van Viaduct, and they had better eyesight in these days, but we used to watch the golden eagles and the buzzards swooping around, and the squirrels and all the other wildlife, and an idyllic upbringing really. And at break times we used to, where that tree is there was a fence that bordered on the railway embankment, and we used to lean over the fence when a steam train would roll into the station, and all manner of trains on the line, large engines, often double banked, pulling express trains that would pass through. There'd be the little local trains with 2 carriages and a tank engine, and the service between Perth and Blair Atholl, and sometimes there'll be a shunting engine, because at that time there was a lot of traffic from the quarry that would load the lime up into wagons and take them away and to all parts of the country. Train passing through the station, that's about the speed they always travel through. One of the most important roles of the signalman was to exchange token. This was a safety measure which ensured that a train couldn't leave the double tracks and move on to the single track section unless they'd got the tablet or token, as it was sometimes called. Now that was okay for stopping trains. They could exchange tablets in a leisurely manner, but for the through trains then it was a bit more problematic. So what they did was they put the tablet or the token in a leather pouch which was attached to a large wooden hoop or ring, and the idea was that the fireman would lean out of the engine window and the signalman would be on the platform holding up the hoop, and the fireman would, as the train passed, it would slow right down of course, and he would grab the hoop on his arm, and then they would he would hand over his token on a hoop, and the signalman would grab the hoop on his arm, and that's the way they exchanged the tokens. This was usually fairly straightforward, but very occasionally things would go wrong, and either the tablet or the signalman, or sometimes both, would end up sprawled on the platform, and we used to watch it from the school up there. The school, which is, you could see the old school playground there, which is level with the roof of that second building, and we used to stand at the fence and watch the exchange of tablets, and if they got it all wrong and the signalman went sprawling on his face on the platform, it was a source of great amusement to the kids assembled on the fence. The train would then have to stop and retrieve the tablet. In winter the train was often late. That's the morning train. We called it the 90 because it arrived at Killiecrankie at precisely 7 minutes to 9 on a good day. In the winter the train was very often late, and this is because the water would freeze in the tanks of the tank engine, and it would take much longer to get steam up. And this was great for us kids. It meant we had to arrive at school in Pitlochry half an hour, sometimes an hour late, and it was a good thing to happen. There was a ticket office here at the time, and the porter, Mr. Robertson, he used to let us into the ticket office where there was a big blazing coal fire, and we'd stand in there while we waited for the train and kept dry and warm. Now in the evening we again got the steam train back again from Pitlochry to Killiecrankie. This was the regular service from Perth to Blair Atholl, and it departed Pitlochry at 20 minutes to 5. So I was back home in the house at 5 o'clock. It was a steam train in my early years, but later it was replaced by a diesel rail car. Now, before we leave the station again, I'll just mention another curious little fact which I wasn't aware of until recently. The trains which were travelling north from the direction of Perth towards Inverness, they stopped at the down platform, which was the one on this side. The trains which were travelling south from Inverness to Perth and onwards, they were called the up trains, even though they were obviously going downhill, and they stopped at this side, the platform at this side. I understand the reason for the up and down business, which doesn't at first appear logical, but apparently this was applied to all railways throughout the country. And any train, as I understand it from my railway enthusiast friends, is that any line travelling towards London was the up line, and any line travelling away from London was referred to as the down line. Originally there were two signal boxes at Killiecrankie Station. There was one on the south side here, where that second house is, and then there was a box on the north side, which was just about where that level crossing is there, and that box was removed in the 1920s. So when they removed the north signal box, they replaced it with a system of manual points, manual levers to change the points. So it was quite a walk from the signal box at the south end all the way up there and back again for the signalman. So they hit on the idea of keeping a bicycle beside the remaining signal box, and when they had to change the points, the signalman would cycle up to the manual points up there and change them and cycle back. Now, a very good friend of mine who will remain nameless, and I certainly wasn't involved, and some of his friends one day let down the tyres of the signalman's bicycle and then went up into the bushes. They knew there was an express train on its way. And so the signalman, as normal, climbed out of his box, jumped on his bicycle and got nowhere, had to throw down the bicycle, and he was rather a portly gentleman, and he had to sprint up all the way the length of the platform, change the points and spring back. And this was a cause of great hilarity to the rascals that were hiding in the bushes. When I was at secondary school, I would cycle from my home, which was a mile up the old A9 here at Atholl, and down here, and I would end up along here and across the bridge and over to what used to be a waiting room. I would drop my bicycle off in the waiting room on the opposite side, and just as the train was entering the double rails at north end of the platform, I was able to run across not far in front of the train and climb up onto the down platform. Sometime Bert Keeler, the train driver, he wouldn't be very happy about me doing this, and he would use some bad language and shake his fist and so on. But anyway, we'll live to tell the tale. In my time, when I lived at Killiecrankie, there was a station master and two porters at the station. This was gradually reduced over time until it became an unmanned halt in the end before it closed down. And on top of that there was a signal box, and there was a duty rota of signalmen, and most of them lived locally, and some lived in these cottages behind us, which were the railway cottages, and this is now, I think, they're all private houses, and they're two houses where there used to be three, and on the end there, the detached house was the station master's house. The employees who lived there were signalmen, station master obviously, porters, and also surfacemen. Now the surfacemen, they looked after the line, made sure everything was okay. An old school colleague of mine, Elizabeth Ryan, whose father was a signalman, recalls that one of those surfacemen would take the school train every morning down to Pitlochry, and then he would walk back about 5 miles all the way back to Killiecrankie along the line, checking the line, and that was his morning's work. So those are the station cottages. We'll just take a walk along and have a quick look at the station master's house, in particular for the magnificent outlook it has.
Yeah.
So now standing in front of the station master's house. This is where the station master would live when there was a station. Latterly it didn't have a station master, they gradually reduced the number of people, but a friend of mine, school friend, latterly lived in this house, and you couldn't ask for a better view than that. It's straight down the pass of Killiecrankie, just where the river disappears round the corner there is the famous Soldiers' Leap.
As we said before, 2 years after the opening of the Inverness and Perth Junction line in 1863, this line became the Highland Line. It then became London, Midland and Scottish, and subsequently British Rail. And it was in 1960 when the chairman of British Rail, Dr. Beeching, wrote a report reshaping of British railways. And this led to far-reaching changes in the railway network, resulting in many line closures and indeed station closures. And that's where the Highland Line in this particular area was hit quite hard. The writing on the wall for Dalguy's, Balin, Lewig, Killiecrankie and Strewn stations appeared in an official letter, which you'll see on the screen, from the Ministry of Transport, dated September the 9th, 1964, written by the Assistant Secretary, one J.H.H. Baxter, exercising powers under Section 56 of the Transport Act of 1962. In discontinuing local passenger services, the letter stated, any hardship resulting from the station closures would be compensated for by the provision of additional bus services, meaning that a very limited number of users would be affected. That was really the death knell for a lot of stations. This is where we said goodbye to Killiecrankie Station in 1965. Today, Abellio ScotRail, Caledonian Sleeper and LNER trains, as well as a daily goods service operated by Eddie Stobart on behalf of Tesco, provide regular services on the line from Perth through to Inverness. The memories of Killiecrankie Station remain, as you will have seen in this production. So we come to the end of our production, and as Stewart MacGlashen pointed out at the very beginning, this production is undertaken on behalf of the Soldiers of Killiecrankie, which is a local organisation designed to promote history in the area. It's always interesting when you research a project like this that the more you dig into the subject, the more you learn. You think you know everything, but it's only when you go into the research that you learn a whole lot more, and this has enabled us to produce what we hope will be a popular production. Now, before we close, we'd like to say thank you to a number of people who made this whole production possible. The Atholl Country Life Museum, which itself is well worth a visit, Elizabeth Royan, Russell Robertson, Stuart MacDonald, Jules Akel, our cameraman James Rattray, and co-presenter Stewart MacGlashen. I hope that you will tune in to YouTube and look at other presentations undertaken by the soldiers of Killiecrankie. Or you can go to our website, soldiersofkilliecrankie.co.uk. There is a great store of local knowledge to help you understand that Killiecrankie is not just a name.